You are listening to the Religica Theolab podcast in the Center for Ecumenical and Interreligious Engagement at Seattle University.
This is Michael Reid Trice, Director at the Center for Ecumenical and Interreligious Engagement at Seattle University. You're listening to the Religica Theolab at the Center, and today I'm speaking with Reverend Dr. Joshtrom Isaac Kureethadam, who meets regularly with His Holiness Pope Francis at the Vatican, as Father Josh is coordinator of Ecology and Creation at the Vatican Dicastery for promoting integral human development. He'll tell us more about what that is. He's also chair of Philosophy of Science and director of the Institute of Social and Political Sciences at the Salesian Pontifical University in Rome. His most recent books include The 10 Green Commandments of Laudato Si, that's 2019, The Philosophical Roots of the Ecological Crisis, which we'll talk about, that came out in 2017, and Creation in Crisis, Science, Ethics, and Theology, which arrived in 2014. Today, Father Josh and I are talking about the Vatican Laudato Si action platform that calls universities and communities, people in all walks of life, including Seattle University, to a rich and integrated approach for responding to Pope Francis's call across society for change. We discuss the need for a deep conversion of the heart in each of us with relation to the climate crisis, a change that's necessary for the sake of our shared future, for our children, for our students, and for our neighbors. I encourage you to take a listen. What is your position as the coordinator of the sector of Ecology and Creation at the Vatican Dicastery for promoting integral human development? What does that position entail in your daily activity from working with universities, local communities? I think a listener would love to know.
Thank you, Michael. A dicastery would mean something like a ministry, or the US you have, I think secretary, or, so these would be like cabinet ministers, or, and so we have this dicastery, which was created by Pope Francis in 2017, 1st of January, for integral human development, which is, many sectors, of which one of this is ecology. We also have economy. We have one section for migration, one section for healthcare, and then peace, security. So whatever is concerned with and somehow I like to say it's integral, it should be integral human flourishing. That's even a more complete word. So, and I've been asked I coordinate the ecology sector, which, as you know, Laudato Si was published in 2015, and then Laudato Si has become our leading light or our inspiration. So our sector, and we are like some 7-8 of us in our sector, we try to coordinate the initiatives of Pope Francis, of the entire church, not just the Holy See, but also the local churches, and Laudato Si is addressed to all people of goodwill. So we very much partner with other religions and with the civil society, with NGOs, with everyone. And my job would be to coordinate, whatever in the name of the Holy See. Our dicastery and the creation care is one of the missions entrusted to our dicastery. Mm-hmm. So I try to coordinate, create partnerships to promote creation care, the climate crisis, biodiversity. But as you know, it's also very much the cry of the poor, also connected to migration, food security. So in all those areas we work. Yeah.
I imagine with your work, you're traveling, as I know, all around the world, visiting with local communities, also in international contexts, one of which we'll talk about in a moment. But in that work, as you've noted, in terms of attentiveness to integral ecology for human flourishing, could you say a little more about the flourishing aspect that is intended for us and that Pope Francis is spending considerable time caring about?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think, first of all, one thing I also listening to Pope Francis several times, I think he has really found the connection between how the ecological problems are very much connected to human suffering, what he calls the cry of the poor. And this is integral ecology, everything is connected, And I know why he himself, as he says, has had an ecological conversion. Like many people used to think, why should church or why should we be concerned about environmental issues, And then he says it was when he went to the Amazon, and he saw so much of suffering, and he found how everything is connected, how the flourishing of the planet is so essential to the flourishing of human life. And Amazon is, everything is so clear, and that was and he saw the indigenous people being deprived of their rights. I think that was his moment of ecological conversion. And so he has seen that for integral human flourishing, we need to begin with, we need to have a common home, which is in good state. And as theologian, I always think of, the book of Genesis. It's interesting, humanity and even the other creatures, we come only on the very last day, on the sixth day, God first has to create this garden, sun and moon. It's done in a very mythical way, but using the cosmology of the time. But the logic is beautiful, the sun and moon, light, and all those are created, then water, and land is separated from the waters, and then the garden is created. And as we know, the history of the planet, this is what happened. Earth is 4.52 billion years old, and life begins around 3.9 billion years old. But then real biodiversity flourishing happened around 545 million years ago. And when all this reached sort of a peak, or the maximum or the optimal situation, we find humanity entering, and we Homo sapiens is 200,000 years ago. It's something like what happened in the narration of the Genesis. When the garden is ready, Adam and Eve are brought in to live in that. And it always struck me also Genesis 2:15, when what I call our first job description is to cultivate and take care of this garden. So the first condition for human flourishing is we have a livable home, And the second would be we live as a common family. In a family, we all flourish together. And flourishing is at all levels, even with biodiversity. If all this, we flourish together. Where the climate is important, ecosystems are important. We have clean air. We have water. In the same way for humanity, also that in a family, we won't be happy if I flourish and my brother or my sister is suffering. Is hungry. Then I won't be even able to eat. Literally, So, and I think that's again for Francis has seen that. So the integral ecology, the beauty is he connects all this. I was very impressed. I was in Glasgow
at COP26 there.
At COP26, and we had a meeting with the IPCC head, and with Cardinal Parolin and just three of us. And towards the end of the meeting, the IPCC head, president, he said, I'm so appreciative of Laudato Si. And he said, for this integral ecological vision, he said, many have spoken about ecology in the last 40, 50 years or so. Many have taken a systemic approach. Pope Francis is not the first one. But he said, Pope Francis is the first one who connects both. Integral approach and the ecological vision, So I think that is very much the uniqueness of Laudato. And, hearing it from the head of the IPCC was humbling,
Yeah, that's extraordinary, really, an affirmation of the work. And to your point also, to the points you just made, it's really remarkable when we think, isn't it, that biodiversity on the planet, the last 45 million years, this sense of a common family and a shared responsibility in the great expanse chronologically of the cosmos, that's just a precious small amount of time. And yet in Laudato Si, and I want to encourage the listener to go and find that document. It's free. It's online. You can download it at any time. Laudato Si, which came out in 2015. His Holiness Pope Francis is really, I think, clarifying, as you've identified, what our moral and spiritual responsibilities are. And I'm reminded that just before the COP26 event or convening this last fall of 2021, on October 4th, he issued a plea to protect the environment and warning that future generations will never forgive us if we miss the opportunity to protect our common home in the way you're discussing there. Is Pope Francis, do you think, seeing this ecological crisis as a deeper spiritual crisis first? And if so, when we look at the next 5 to 10 years ahead, what is our work, both spiritually and ecologically, to respond to that crisis?
Thank you. This again, I would say the various layers of the ecological crisis. One is it's a physical problem, and we are thankful to the scientific community for highlighting it and giving us excellent, and thanks to them very consistently, in spite of sometimes being their lives have been made difficult in many places, but they have kept on, and we are so grateful to them. And it's an ethical moral problem because the poor are disproportionately suffering. So it's very much a cry of the poor. But I think the third level is going deeper. It is a spiritual problem. Laudato Si, right at the beginning, the second paragraph, Pope Francis says, the violence present in our hearts is manifested in the degradation of the soil, of the air, of the water outside, So there is a close connection. And towards the end of Laudato Si 217, Pope Francis quotes his predecessor, Pope Benedict. And I remember literally the day Pope Benedict became Pope, 2005, I was in the UK, I was a student. And I remember, seeing that Mass on the television. And during the homily, Pope Benedict made a very, very beautiful statement, also very touching. He said, the external deserts are expanding because the internal deserts have become so vast, And Pope Francis quotes that phrase in Laudato Si, So that is the reason, we need to work at various levels, but until we reach the roots, the spiritual roots, and it's also very much the Old Testament. We have Prophet Hosea, who at one moment he writes that the fish is dying in our rivers, the rivers have become polluted because Israel has sinned. Israel has fallen into idolatry, but also the poor are being oppressed and the widows are being neglected, So sometimes that not worries me, but then I really realize we need to cut down carbon emissions, so important. We need to recycle, but probably it's not sufficient. We need integral transformation, otherwise. And if I might also connect, injustice is very much connected to the infertility of the land. And again, going back to Genesis, is chapter 3, as I said, the garden has been created where life is flourishing. Then sin begins to creep in. First, Adam and Eve, they shirk their responsibility to cultivate this garden. But especially when Cain kills his own brother Abel, and innocent blood is shed, and the earth drinks that innocent blood. And Genesis 3:17, I think, that says the garden has become a desert. Only thistles and thorns will grow. It's no more garden. It's just wild, just the human sin, innocent blood being shed, and the land is soaked with this blood, and the land becomes infertile. It doesn't produce anymore. It becomes wild. So there is a very deep connection, so unless we also work at that level, that's where religious communities can do a lot, So on 4th of October, and we are also very much involved. We prepared over a year that meeting for several reasons. One is because faith communities we are a large force. And I think of EAD from UNEP, from the United, Environment Program in Nairobi, but also many others who are realizing that. As everyone says, we are 83% of humanity, belonging to one religious tradition or another, So we are a big force. But second thing is we have so much of resources in our tradition. And the third thing is just what I mentioned, that unless we address the spiritual roots, probably we won't be able to really meet the challenge, But I don't want to only absolutize that. We need to work at all levels. The physical, moral, justice element is so important, but also the spiritual.
No, I hear that in your words, and following your work and the way in which you are clearly working at numerous levels at once in terms of care for the most marginalized, for the poor, thinking of the moral implications, the spiritual, the physical and ecological on the planet, and balancing all of that. And something else you've also mentioned with this narrative of Cain and Abel, it's not a rhetorical question, is it? When God asks, where is your brother? His blood is crying to me from the ground, and suggesting we have a moral responsibility, all of us, one to the other, especially where there is such a disequilibrium in the world for access from one country or one region to another that really can impact the kind of flourishing that you're talking about. It reminds me that UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres noted right before COP26 that this was another thundering wake-up call, referring to the scientific report on climate change that had just come out. And he notes at that time that the emissions gap, aligned with what we're talking about here, is a result of a leadership gap, he said at the launch of that study. I think in terms of the leadership gap, you might have something also to say about moral leadership as a response to the non-rhetorical inquiry from the divine. Where's your brother? Where's your sibling? Where's your responsibility? Are we taking that seriously enough? What needs to change? What do you see as particularly perilous or that we need to be attentive to? Now in the next 3 to 5 years?
Thank you. And the one of Cain and Abel keeps resonating within me. And I was just remembering when God asks, "Where is your brother?" and Cain very arrogantly says, "Am I the keeper of my brother?" And in Hebrew, the word "keeping" was already used in the second chapter when God asked Adam and Eve to keep the garden, and they didn't keep the garden.
Interesting.
And then we have Cain, their son, not keeping his brother.
Mm-hmm.
And I think both are very much connected, keeping the garden, caring for the garden, and caring for one another. There's an intimate link,
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, there is moral leadership, and Antonio Guterres, we also appreciate him a lot, and we see that he's very much the same wavelength with Pope Francis, and there is very good chemistry between them, between Antonio Guterres and Pope Francis. And moral leadership is, first of all, speaking out. I think we need to be prophetic, and Guterres does it at the political level, and Pope Francis does it at all levels possible. We need to stand up for our brother. And today, especially those who are well off, they don't need, they're okay. It's the migrants or the indigenous communities or children on the street or women who are abused. And also other species, they have no voice at all. So that's the place where we need to really get back to our vocation to keep. And I don't know if I'm speaking too much as a priest, but then, I always think, and Pope Francis, I'm sure, is inspired by the end of Matthew chapter 25, verses 31 to 46, where it speaks of the last judgment, the final exam that all of us will have to go through. When the questions that, as for us Christians that we believe that Jesus is going to ask, and Jesus said that as in a parable, is, I was hungry, I was thirsty, I was naked, I was a stranger, I was sick, I was in prison. And you came to visit me, or you fed me, you took care of me, or you didn't, that you were the keeper of your brother. Just that, that's the only question we will be asked. And if I might also add, that's also again what gives us hope, because ultimately we are empathetic. Even recently, and I see every now and then a study comes out. With Darwin, we thought, evolution is the survival of the fittest. And right now that's very much disproved. Like they say, why Homo, there are many lineages, Homo erectus and, many others. They say why Homo sapiens survived. They say Homo neanderthalensis was much smarter than us, in terms of meeting adverse climate situations or many other, even technically they had much advanced instruments for those times, but Homo sapiens, we are the only ones that survived. And today we are realizing that's because we have the capacity for empathy. When someone is being left behind, and the whole community, and that preserves the community. It's not the survival of the fittest going ahead, then one day he or she will perish. We preserve the community, and we are seeing it. That's what really gives us hope. I remember also in Glasgow, elsewhere, civil society marching on the street, and women and faith leaders and grandparents and children, everywhere. Because, the suffering of people in Bangladesh becomes our suffering. And one theme which was heard very loud at this COP was climate justice. In Glasgow, that was resonating very loudly. So if my brother and sister in Congo or in Ghana is not safe, I am not safe. And the other dimension is, unfortunately, being realistic, the crisis is not caused by them. In Africa, it again came up during the COP. There are more than 1 billion people, but their emissions are just 4%, and per capita is even so little. We would always like to stress the positive dimension. We are empathetic beings, and let's hope that, and we are supposed to be Homo sapiens, doubly wise, that you might just stop at the abyss and save not only the planet common home, but also our common human family. They always like to stress the family is also interspecies. God created this, and then we have been given the special responsibility to keep all this, the home, but also our own brothers and sisters, but also other animals. And I really hope we will succeed.
One of the things I'm reminded of when we talk about maybe an emotional or empathy IQ, that's so essential to meeting the crises of our moment, that back once more to the story of Cain and Abel, I think it's 4 times that God inquires about the kind of interior of Cain's heart in response to his brother. In each of those 4 episodes, until the very last, as you identify, Cain remains silent. That we have this capacity for empathy, but these historic traditions where we have sacred texts also remind us at times where we seem to be entrenched in our own kind of self-concern for survival. I hear you saying, our future is going to depend on the survivability of all of us, even empathy, and especially for those we don't know, but they're not abstract humanity. They are our siblings, and somehow we have to imagine that space. I want to also point to your text, The Philosophical Roots of the Ecological Crisis, which came out in 2017. You've committed a significant amount of your own time into understanding the kind of philosophical roots, which is especially interesting in light of what you're also saying with regard to empathy. So you have an understanding in many ways of how we got here philosophically, that the suppositions that inform, let's say, the Industrial Revolution, or a kind of a penchant for wealth acquisition to the exclusion of the neighbor, like those are philosophically ingrained. As you think of that work, are there 2 or 3 aspects across the time of your study where you thought, now here is where we see empathy that does look hopeful, that does look promising across the history, across those philosophical traditions? These 2 or 3 parts of who we are, of our humanity, always appears to show up in terms of how we care for each other. If you see that, what would those be for the listener to contemplate with you?
Yeah. Thank you. If I may say 3 things. One is, I've been in this area nearly 25 years, and it all began when I was working at the missions, and I saw in an area people were committing suicide, the farmers, because of drought. So that was my moment of ecological conversion. Then I began my PhD, but also as a philosopher, I was always impressed by what Albert Einstein used to say, that we cannot solve a problem with the same mentality that created it in the first place. And I think our struggle is that we are trying to become carbon neutral, but the mentality, the paradigm, Thomas Kuhn's an expression, and paradigm is conglomeration of factors, cultural, spiritual, economic, scientific, all this, and that's what we call cultural paradigm. At one moment, I realized that, so unless we go to the roots of that paradigm, we can really bring about change. So that's what kept me to, it was while doing a seminar on Heidegger.
Oh, fascinating.
Yeah, and Heidegger says, with the Descartes, a thing is only a thing and nothing more. Because in the medieval times, or even in Aristotle spoke of telos, and it's a much richer way of looking at a thing. It's made by somebody, but in view of something, there's an agent, the matter of it. But with modernity, it's just, that's, I think, what gave birth to modern science, especially the modern, which has become very extractive economy. We just see nature as inert matter, So that's how I began. Then I started reading Descartes and modernity as a whole, Bacon. And I thought Carolyn Merchant has done a great study on Bacon, though I really thought the real culprit, or culprit in the sense that it's anachronism, but then one who really brought about the change. That's why it's not for simple reasons. Descartes is called the father of modern philosophy. He gave a new metaphysics, a new philosophical vision. I would say with 3 pillars. One is, you are the center, res cogitans, anthropocentrism, and we are still suffering from that, individualism and capitalistic economy. Or I am the center of the world, and so don't worry about the rest. And it's anthropocentrism and all other creatures, but also the Darwin's, the survival of the fittest. The second is this separation, or even before separation, nature we see as inert, as no more. Telos is no more alive, or indigenous, even in medieval times, nature was alive with God's spirit, or indigenous communities, the spirit of the tree or the river, all that. But with modernity, nature falls silent. It just extends, mathematically measurable, which is important. But only that's the problem. We just reduce it to that. No other qualities, only quantity counts. And nature becomes inert matter, for you to exploit or do whatever you want. Then the metaphysical division between res cogitans, which is an ontological metaphysical, is totally other. And there I thought the roots of our problem. So the positive side is we need a relational vision, a relational metaphysics, which again we have so modernity was sort of a detour. And even from the faith perspective, I always think of Trinity. Our conception of God is, what Jesus revealed is very original. It's not individualistic conception. It is even what process philosophy is a process, but it's very much relational. It is Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. Of course, we use images of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, but then they were there together, like keeping their individual autonomy or individuality, but they're together. One does not exist without the other. That's in the Christian tradition. We have in Buddhism, paticca samutpada, no? That again, everything is connected. So almost most philosophically, or in Hinduism, there's Advaita, the non-duality. Everything is connected. So I think we need to recover this relational vision. And that's again what Laudato Si does so beautifully, that everything is connected, that we are connected. And Pope Francis also offered us Fratelli Tutti, reminding us that we are a common family. So we have resources in the past, but we also have the challenges of today can be met by regaining this new, but it's very ancient, but reproposing it for our times, the communitarian thing. At the same time, allow me to be very realistic. I said we are Homo sapiens sapiens, and we are free, we have human liberty. So there's always the choice. And it always, as a philosopher, we think of the Auschwitz or the Holocaust, even where God was Pantheonist, God up to Auschwitz, or, where it's up to us to choose. God can help, bless our journey, but then God respects our liberty. Mm-hmm. So we can save the planet, but we can also go and become more egoistic and also go on that path. Mm-hmm. And as you know, some people are doing it. I mean, who profit, or I don't bother about my brother or sister who suffers, or typhoons, or, I don't bother, it's just my profit, maybe my little country, and we saw it also, unfortunately, also in Glasgow, and I remember the pathetic discourse in the eyes of those from the island states. They said when they realized 1.5, we will reach 2. And they were saying, I remember it was Maldives, a woman minister. She said, for us, the difference between 1.5 and 2 is our death sentence.
Yeah, that's the difference.
Yeah, I could see their pain, that where countries said, no, our interests are paramount, and, we don't compromise. But unless we act together, no one is going to be saved. That's again maybe using our wisdom. We are in it together. Either we sing together or we save ourselves together. So then we hope that wisdom will prevail. And I tend to be optimistic because, also we have to be optimistic. I mean, the other one is collective suicide, so when we think of our responsibility towards our own poor brothers and sisters around the world, but also future generations, that argument. And I also see, also working at the Vatican, but what really changed the narrative is when children came onto the street. And even I used to be discouraged, what's happening? Yeah. Scientifically, we know what's this, and, everyone is not really only blah, blah, talking. It's only when children came onto the streets and said, you are stealing our future. And, that brought grandparents into together. That brought everyone together. That's again an element of hope, because again, I'm sorry for speaking as a priest, but then, after the COP was over, we came back to the Vatican, and on the 14th of November, World Day of the Poor, Pope Francis launched the Laudato Si action platform. And we are seeing from around the world, it's women, children, local communities are acting. And I think that's how the Holy Spirit is saying, okay, because as I want to insist on that, we need politicians. We need, because 70% of change will come when policies change, when legislations change. So we need to put pressure on our politicians. But to put pressure on them, we need a bottom-up people's movement, and that is happening. We see children and, so many people so generously coming forward. So, and I was just going back to the old one, it's our responsibility. It's a liberty element, and as a scientist, the realism sometimes takes, because even the 1.5 degrees, I remember 1 degree was forecast for 2025 by the IPCC in 1992, I think. IPCC reports are very good, but they are conservative because you need to get Saudi Arabia and everyone on board, so many things get watered down. And we reached 1 degree almost 10 years ahead.
Well, this is one thing I want to ask you. I want to make sure the listener also captured the really refined points you were making about perhaps what happens to us philosophically if, in the history of the tradition, as you've identified, with the emphasis on my own ego and the protection of myself and a sense of separation from nature. So every object around me doesn't really have a purpose towards something that's intended to be shared. It's meant to be used. It can be used as anything without any kind of moral responsibility, let's say. And over time, that can also mean using others. So a sense of consumption in the world just grows. I become my own consumed object. I can consume other objects. I can treat other human beings as objects to be consumed. And over time, there's this kind of mutual diminishment you're really talking about, I think, and recovering a sense of mutual belonging and a sense of empathy, which would refuse, I think, that kind of objectification of others and of ourselves. That empathy is always looking for purpose. It's looking for deeper connection in the way that you've described. And then you've mentioned the Laudato Si action platform, which strikes me as a significant effort to actually rewrite some of the very things you identify, that it really places its strengths on, we are going to be connected because integral ecology and human flourishing does require that we don't see ourselves as the center of the universe individually, that my neighbor is meaningful and that they have their own internal purpose outside of my desire to objectify them. And I have to be attentive to that morally. I have to respect that. Having said that, if I'm right about that, if I've got some of that correct, what do you see, or what are you hopeful about in terms of the Laudato Si action platform? Also inclusive, I should say, of universities that have stepped forward in responses to that platform. What is that platform, and why do you think there's such a healthy response? What are you hoping for ultimately?
Yeah, thank you, Michael. And if I might just also comment on the great analysis he made, great. And this is the throwaway culture, not only of things, but also migrants, or, we don't value the other person. Probably we value them in terms of their economic worth, or, and that's again a very material evaluation of people. Mm-hmm. It's again, as Pope Francis says, we need to overcome that culture. It's all in this context that he proposed the Laudato Si action platform. As you said, Laudato Si was published in 2015, an encyclical that's the highest form of teaching from the part of the Pope. And hardly 5 years after that, he announced a special Laudato Si anniversary year. And Pope Francis' own words were that the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor have got even louder and more painful. So we need to get back to Laudato Si. Mm-hmm. At the end of that, the Laudato Si year, Pope Francis himself launched the Laudato Si action platform. And now, if I might say three things about the why of it is, time is running out. And I can also confess that we began working nearly 3 years ago when a group of scientists came to the Vatican. That was before the 1.5 degrees centigrade came out of the IPCC. I don't know, for the help of our audience, we keep on saying 1.5, when I find it very useful when I tell the students, and somebody asks me, what is the problem with 2 or 3? Then I tell them, imagine we are in an interglacial epoch, last 10, 12,000 years. And during the entire last 12,000 years, Earth's average temperature did not vary by more than 1 degree. All this 12,000 years or so. That's when human civilization was born, agriculture was created, that's when we began to flourish. And from 1850 up to today, the temperature has risen by 1.1 degrees centigrade, and we are seeing the impacts around the world. Mm-hmm. And 1.5 degrees centigrade means it's going to be 50% worse than today.
50% worse than what we're already seeing.
But that is the minimum we can afford to limit, because first of all, CO2 remains steady for 100 years, and there are so many factors. So it is already bad. But the scientists told us, okay, 1.5, that's the catastrophic limit. Mm-hmm. As you know, even with the Glasgow, with all the promises, we are going to reach 2.4. Imagine.
Yeah. So that is, for the listener, that is a devastating number, right? At 2.4, what does that mean for some of the things we're talking about? Life gets incredibly difficult at 2.4.
Yeah, think of the Arctic, for example. The Greenland is melting. Unfortunately, last summer, for the first time, it rained on the Greenland. Mm-hmm. And a couple of days ago, a study came out saying that on the 20th of June, Siberia, one area reached 38 degrees centigrade, which is just minus 30 or 40. Summer warms up a bit, but 38 degrees centigrade.
Incomprehensible. Yeah, 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Right? We're talking about significant, formerly unknown, right, temperature lifts.
Yeah, and also the latest IPCC report said of this August, if the Greenland were to melt, sea level rise around the world is something like 7.2 meters, imagine. And if we can remain within 1.5 degrees centigrade, that will happen over thousands of years. So we can adapt to an extent But if we just cross 2, that's going to be within centuries or even unpredictable. So I sometimes feel sorry, we don't realize the big risk we are taking. We cannot afford to take a risk. We won't do it with our home or there's such a danger. But as our common home, we are taking this. So this was the urgency that prompted us when the scientists, they met with Pope Francis, then they came to us, then we said we need to start acting. The second thing is we said we need an integral approach. I already spoke about it. So we need to bring everyone together. So it meant 2 things. First, that we need to bring everyone together. So we said we need to involve families, parishes, dioceses, schools, university. We thought of 7 sectors. So third will be school, parishes, dioceses, families, parish, dioceses, schools, and universities. Fourth is hospitals and healthcare centers. Fifth is the world of economy, business, farms, labor movements, all that. Sixth would be groups, movements, organizations, and 7th would be religious orders. And, the Jesuits, very familiar. Just a few days ago, the Jesuit Father General said the entire Jesuit family is going to embrace the Laudato Si Action platform. And the university is part of that, so involving all the partners. And the second thing about integral ecological vision is not just carbon neutrality. So we propose the sustainable development goals. We propose 7 Laudato Si goals. It's all on the website, cry of the earth. So renewable energy, water, biodiversity, all that. Then cry of the poor, that we keep the poor at the center. The most vulnerable could be minorities, could be migrants, could be women, trafficked, or it changes according to in various contexts. Then we change the economic paradigm at the macro level. Then we change the micro level, my own lifestyles. Then education and spirituality, both are important, and this again, universities, such a crucial role. And the 7th thing, we purposely said, all this we do as a community. We just want to break away from this individualistic, because we found at one stage, and there have been many states, even oil companies were using that strategy, you can change the world, that you are the center, and the world has not changed. We're saying let's change the paradigm. We're saying, so we're asking families to join, parishes to join, schools to join, and religious orders to join, but always as a community. So 7 Laudato Si goals and 7 years. We are saying in 7 years become a Laudato Si university, a Seattle University is going to become. That is again a biblical number. 7 is the number of fullness and the Jubilee concept, all that. And what really gives us hope is the 2 things. First is the vision that Pope Francis gave us. He said, okay, make it an exponential journey. So this year we are trying to get as many people enrolled. And next year we'll invite a new group. So if we had, say, 2,000 schools this year, and we will have thousands as people are getting enrolled. Next year, we want to have at least 4,000 who will do their 7 years journey. 2023, the double of that, 8,000, then 16,000. So in a few years, we really get what we call the critical mass. And that is the element of hope we see, is that it was based on a Harvard study, but many others have studied that. They said any change is possible when a critical mass is reached. And the good news is that the critical mass is not a big number. They say if you're 3.5% of a group, we have the critical mass for change, which can trigger change. That's how the Berlin Wall came down, a very classical example, very recent. And what Nelson Mandela or Martin Luther King or Mahatma Gandhi, and we think, sorry for saying it from the Vatican, that Pope Francis is probably that charismatic leader for today who can, because people don't change because of ideas or facts or numbers. People change because there is the charismatic leader who can inspire a movement.
That's right. And it is inspiration to hear what you're saying as well. We may be on route to 2.4 degrees Celsius, but you're also noting it takes 3.5% really of portion of the population to emit that kind of change. And the change that you're calling for in Laudato Si that we're seeing, that we're discussing in terms of integral human flourishing really is the paradigmatic shift of a conversion of the heart. Yeah. So it starts perhaps with each of us in community, a sense that I have a role to play, whether that's in a university or in my family or in a community or with my neighbor, and that role is not to be diminished in any way, shape, or form because it has the capacity truly to participate in that kind of conversion. That sounds, as you're speaking to it, I so appreciate you speaking both as a professor, a scientist, and as a priest, because that conversion of heart should cross every aspect of our lives, shouldn't it?
Very true, Michael. And we are also trying to make it as inclusive as possible, because that's again another secret, or, so I said all the 7 sectors, but we're also working with other churches. So you want to make it ecumenical. Even this morning, I was talking with somebody from the Anglican Church, So then also we want to make it interreligious, the Parliament of Religions and others. So together we should be able to make this 3.5. But again, there for the society to change, we need between 21 to 24% that we hope to get within a decade or so. So once the critical mass is reached, change is triggered and it happens, then we need to get the societal transformation, and all that we need to do it within a decade, And the optimistic thing is, as you said, I think by now people are realizing that we need to do something, There's sometimes a despair. What can I do? China is doing this, or Russia is doing this, or the world is after consumer. But, I can make a difference. I always think of Mother Teresa of Calcutta used to say, yeah, what I do is just a drop in the ocean. But, in the end, the ocean is just made up of, drops. And you can see the amount of good that, her sisters are doing around the world. And we are literally, even you said about the universities, we have over 100 partners just leading the university sector. And I see them as a very pivotal contribution. First of all, because universities can usher in this paradigm change. They create culture, and, so they can really offer a new metaphysics of working together, but also this holistic relational vision. Second, because universities are forming future leaders, or they're going to become managers, or all fields of life. So I am very delighted to see so many universities joining. Remaining in the US, some time ago, California, all the 24 dioceses voted unanimously.
Remarkable.
To join the Laudato Action Platform. This morning, I got in the office from the Washington Archdiocese. They have embraced the 7, and a beautiful booklet in English and Spanish, with all the 7 Laudato Si goals. They're saying what can be done. And I remember I didn't have time to read through the whole booklet. One place I saw, they said the number of schools buying renewable energy has risen from 2 to 91 in just a few months' time. So which means change is possible from 2 to 91. I don't know, it's almost such a huge change, And they have made plans for the whole diocese, responding to the 7 Laudato Si goals in 7 years. I know the Archdiocese of Chicago is doing it. And the Catholic Climate Covenant in the US is our sort of hub leading the whole process. And the Jesuits, the Father General came out with a statement inviting all the Jesuits to become Laudato Si communities. And it's enough that we join together and we can make things change happen.
I want to encourage the listener to follow the lead here. Read Laudato Si. Assess the Laudato Si Action Platform. You can find this online. We'll provide those links also through the Center for Ecumenical and Interreligious Engagement. And I hope, Father Josh, thank you so much for this time. I hope that we can follow up in a year and have a further assessment of how has that action platform continued to mature, and what do you see as the next specific steps for transformation that all of us can participate in. I want to thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you so much, Michael, for making this message to reach as many people as possible. And also allow me to thank you also in the name of Pope Francis for doing this.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks to all our listeners. Thank you very much.
You've been listening to the Religica Theolab podcast in the Center for Ecumenical and Interreligious Engagement at Seattle University. To learn more about the center's work and for resources to be used in local communities, visit us at seattleu.edu/thecenter.